So we're doing all our prep work right now. We're doing the meshing up, the taping up. This just stops the chance of any cracking. It's the standard that we do anyway. We're going to put some beads on the corners here. The new formulation, it's a larger grain, so it reacts better with beads and thickness. Obviously the old batch, it was rolling a bit and struggling to get a finish on the bead areas. So we've changed the grain to a bigger grain. It's got a larger grain, so it doesn't roll and pull on the beads, it gives it a flat finish. We've got the bag of skim, we've got the water. We're just ready now to start mixing up, ready to apply the plaster. Your water consistency is based on what substrate you're going over. So if you was going over an Artex ceiling, for instance, you'd make it a bit stiffer. So you wouldn't use as much water as you would if you was going over a plasterboard finish. I've got a bucket that I use. I fill it half with water, then the rest of the plaster goes in. Clean water, which is imperative, so it doesn't go off too quick on you. Clean mixing bucket is a must. And obviously clean whisk. If you want it stiff, by all means knock it up stiff. If you want it wet, by all means knock it up wet. Just be mindful that timings will change. Just make sure you give the sides a scrape, get all the powder off the sides as well so you don't get any clumps. We've got a nice creamy consistency of the plaster now. This is ready to apply to the walls for our first coat. Just give it a feel, make sure it's ready. If it needs a bit more water or it needs a bit more powder, then this is the time to be doing it really. But we're looking for a creamy consistency anyway. It's 12, I'm hoping to be done for about 2 o'clock. It's mixed up accordingly, depending on what substrate you're going over. So if you're going over an Artex ceiling, you make it a bit stiffer, so you won't add as much water. If you're skimming over plasterboard, for instance, you'll mix it up creamy, as you would other brands. So obviously with the different substrates as well, you'll be mixing it up a little bit thicker. We don't want it too thick, but we don't want it too wet either. It's the same as every other brand really. You do it to your accordance to the substrates and the way that you apply your plasters. So I'm just applying my first coat to the top of the walls now. At about 1.5mm thick. Trowel wise, we use a rigid trowel. I use Nella. I use that for laying on up until my third trowel. First coat, obviously, if it's onto plasterboard, I generally go about 1 to 1.5mm thick on the first coat. It's onto plasterboard anyway, so we're going about 1 to 2mm thick. If you're skimming over an over skim or Artex, and obviously that differs. You start at 2mm with your first coat on over skim. Then obviously if it's Artex, then you go a bit thicker just to get over that patterning. Once you've got your first coat on, you flatten it, wash all off, give it a good 15 minutes. It depends on the substrate. Obviously your timings do adjust accordingly to what you're actually working on. Give it time to pick up a bit, then we'll start applying our second coat. In the meantime, we will be flattening off, so getting all the lines out that we've applied with the trowel movements. So we're just testing the walls now, the first coat, see if it's ready for second. We feel the plaster, see if it's dry enough, but obviously it's not. So we're going to leave this another 5 to 10 minutes just to make sure that it's ready, Obviously, one of the things that people have had problems with is the timings and getting the second coat on too soon. So touching it, you can still see it's still too wet for the second coat. One of the reasons we wanted to dry a bit more the first coat is to stop any rolling of the first coat when we apply the second coat. That causes clumping basically, which will obviously then turn into tearing and bubbling. So we're trying to eradicate that. So we want to get to a point where we're not going to get that when we put the second coat on and we start trailing up. It's easy to hit it too soon, so we've got to make sure we get them timings correct and show you. So you've got to avoid the temptation of going over it and going over it. And then you knock up your second coat. That's applied at 1 mil thick, whether it's on sand and cement render substrate, Artex or plasterboard. You always keep to around a 1 mil thickness on that second coat. So we're now applying our second coat to a touch dry first coat. We're going about 1 mil thick, so using the grain really as a guidance to the thickness that we need to be acquiring. Your application process is near enough exactly identical to other brands, but you've got to make sure you've got that application process near enough bob on so you don't get those problems where it's bubbling and tearing. If it does bubble and tear, walk away for 5 minutes, go back again and it should be fine. First coat's about filling out and getting a required thickness. Second coat's more about flattening out more than anything and applying an even coating to the plaster. After applying the second coat, we've left it about 15-20 minutes. We're just giving it the first trial now just to get any blemishes, lines out. You don't really need a lot of pressure. It's just about getting all the guides out and flattening it off more than anything. Like Mr. Water, stops any pulling or tearing. Just helps to flatten any discrepancies out more than anything as well. It's the part where the colour's going to start to change to a dove grey. This is after the second trowel. We're going to be leaving this 5-10 minutes and that'll be where we start applying with you can use your Nelaflex or you can use your rigid trowel, but we want to be getting a continuous colour change all through the wall before we start applying any pressure. Obviously we don't want to hit it too soon because then we'd start having problems where it's tearing on the wetter areas, so we've got to try and get a continuous colour change throughout the area. With the Make Good material, you can't hit it as early as you would other brands, so this you have to make sure you get them time spans perfect, otherwise you're going to be in a dilemma where it's not working the way it should be. You've got to react to the plaster. So I'm going to be using a Superflex trowel. Aaron's going to be using his rigid trowel. Just to show on camera, you can use both trowels to finish the Make Good Multi Skim. Your application process is near enough exactly identical to other brands, but you've got to make sure you've got that application process near enough bob on so you don't get those problems where it's bubbling and tearing. If it does bubble and tear, walk away for 5 minutes, go back again and it should be fine. So now we're on our polishing stage. We've left it another 5 to 10 minutes. It's all one colour now, it's all dove grey. So we just, you can put as much pressure as you want on to get a nice shine to the wall now, or you can put as little as possible. It's totally up to yourselves. Customers love a bit of a shine to a wall, so I mean, you can get away with just doing the 3 trowels, but most plasterers these days, we all give it four trowels just to put a bit of shine on the wall. I do like to keep my trowel pretty wet, so a damp brush over the top of it and maybe just to run your brush in front of your trowel prior to your polish as well, and you get a nice clean finish. We started applying the plaster about 12, it's now 2 and we're fully finished. Obviously the process relatively the same, just leave a bit more time in between to what we do with other brands. The coverage, I mean, we've done 20 square metres here. I think we've used just over a bag of plaster, so that's obviously going to save a lot of money over the year in materials. So it's going to be more cost effective for anybody to use. Yeah, lovely gear, very nice.